You are now listening to Beyond Zeros and Ones, a podcast on the impacts of technologies in our daily lives and on the tourism industry.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. This is your host, Mario Hardy from the Pacific Asia Travel Association. And you're now joining a new podcast series, which is called Beyond Zeros and One, where we will be exploring the future of technology and its implication on our daily life and in travel. Today, my guest is Étienne Mérineau, who's the co-founder of Heyday.ai, a company that specializes in chatbot development. And Étienne studied at MIT. He has won 55 awards. He was also the 30 under 30 of Forbes magazine in 2018. Étienne, welcome to the show.
Hi, Mario. Thanks for having me.
Very good. Étienne, tell me a little bit more about yourself. You're born in Montreal, I believe, the same place I was born. But tell us a little bit more about your background.
Yes, born and raised in Montreal, as you realize with the French name, French Canadian, proud French Canadian. Well, I kind of lived through a personal reinvention before going into technology. I come from the advertising agency space. I was a copywriter actually, and then as you mentioned, I got the opportunity to go to MIT. There was what they called an entrepreneurship boot camp, so it was really kind of a simulation where you had to launch a company in a few days. Very intense. We didn't sleep, but that really kind of made me open my eyes that maybe after all I wasn't a corporate. I was more of an entrepreneur. And slowly after that, I kind of I started to stack a little bit of money to have a bit of a cushion. But 6 months later, I quit my corporate job without really knowing what I was going to do. Took the leap of faith, and fast forward to today. While I'm as you mentioned in the intro, now an AI entrepreneur with a company of 50 people, one of the co-founders of Heyday. So yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell a little bit about me, my background, and where I am now.
Very nice journey. And now tell us a little bit more about Heyday.ai and this company. You and I had a coffee together when I was visiting Montreal a few years ago. And I remember you telling me a little bit about the company. I was fascinated by it. So tell us a little bit more about what Heyday does.
Yeah, so we're it's in the space of what they call conversational AI, but we really kind of matured over time working with retailers. And essentially, at the end of the day, we're a customer messaging platform. So we're really connecting online shoppers with brands, with internal resources like in-store associates, for instance, or a customer service agent. And the AI assistant or the chatbot is just the first line of defense, just an instant response that can give a first line of support, but then when necessary, will triage the conversations and escalate them to the right person on the team. So it's really a hybrid system. It's not just AI.
Excellent. Montreal has become actually known as the world capital of AI development. Do you know why? Was there any funding from the government or subsidies or any ways that the government encouraged the development of AI?
Yeah, well, there was a major hub at there still is a major hub of artificial intelligence research and development at the University of Montreal, and that hub I think originated in the 80s, so it dates back to even way before all the hype about AI in the modern days, and then obviously because of that concentration of talent in a city. Naturally, when the AI revolution started to really kind of take off in around 2015, well, the government started to pour some kerosene, pour some gasoline on the fire with grants and loans and subsidies to really encourage the ecosystem to start creating companies. You've seen it with the first generation of companies like Element.ai, who they were recently acquired by an American firm, but Element.ai, for example, was one of the first generations. Heyday as well, founded in 2017, so shortly after that first wave. And I guess it's just AI is becoming more and more pervasive. So in a few years from now, you'll say AI, saying AI is going to be as if you're saying internet, right? It's going to be so ubiquitous. So I think what's interesting is there's a strong ecosystem, and it's really putting Montreal and to a broader extent Canada on the map. And it's very exciting for a young and small company like ourselves to be part of it, and even to get a recently we just closed some more additional financing, and as part of that round, there's a Investissement Québec, so a government owned investment arm. So again, the government is trying to stay active and encourage the local economy at the cutting edge of AI.
You've described Heyday as a conversational AI for retailers and brands. Can you elaborate just a little bit more in layman terms for the audience who may not actually know or understand what chatbot is and what it does? So if I'm a brand, how can I use your chatbot AI? How would it help my business?
Yeah, so essentially, when you're going as a customer on a website, and at the bottom right or bottom left, you're going to see a little chat window, a chat widget that will either pop up automatically or you can trigger with a click. And there are one of two options when you do that. Number one, it could be human powered, so it's like a call center. You're going to send a message, and if no one is available, well, it's basically like sending your question in the stratosphere, right? You'll be waiting for some time, sometimes 5 minutes, sometimes 5 hours. So what we did is created kind of an in-between step where there's a chatbot / AI assistant that's kind of or virtual customer assistant. These are all synonyms that acts as a first line of defense and basically answers automatically to questions that are incoming from customers. This AI assistant for us is focused on retail, as you mentioned. So what's the advantage of focusing on a specific vertical is that questions are pretty redundant. They keep coming back, like what is your return policy, or what are your shipping fees? Do you ship to Montreal, to Bangkok? Do you sell gift cards? All these redundant questions that tend to flood customer service teams. Our goal with our technology is basically to remove all that first line of questions from their plate, so that you can focus your human team on the high value conversations, so the more sensitive or complex or personalized conversations. So it's really a hybrid system in that sense. So for the customer, the benefit, as you can imagine, is an instant response and in a self-serve fashion, 24/7 availability. For the brand, two sides. Well, number one, lead capture. So making sure that you engage people who are coming on your site, that they don't bounce without, even they showed up technically to shop and buy something. So if you're not helping them, maybe they're leaving and you lost the sale. So number one, there's a lead capture. Number two, there's obviously cost reduction from, as I mentioned, when your team is being bombarded and you need to keep hiring more people, or worse, because you're responding too slow, while your customer satisfaction and net promoter score is going down. This is bad, bad for the bottom line. So for the brand, there's definitely benefit, but at the end of the day, we always say for our customers are happy we're doing a good job. So the end customer is really why we build this company and how we design everything.
Now, my next question is more for those who are maybe more knowledgeable about AI or interested in the topic. I'm sure you've been asked before, you've been questioned about this several times before. A lot of people will tell you, well, actually, chatbot is not really AI. It's a bunch of zeros and ones and some math calculations and some tables, and where a machine just answers questions based on a table that are preset. What would you say to someone who comment on this?
Well, they're right. I mean, the thing is that chatbots are not all created equal, right? So depending on which type of chatbot you've been interacting with, your experience may vary, and therefore your satisfaction. The spectrum is pretty broad. So on one side, on let's say the left end, the lower end, you're gonna have kind of like those drag and drops, do-it-yourself automated workflows. And these are not smart. They're just kind of, as you mentioned, if this, then that, right? If question A, well, answer A, and it's a decision tree, like basically like an IVR. When you're calling a call center, press 1, press 3. This is basically like the chatbot equivalent of that. And that experience is limited, obviously, because it requires a decision tree and pre-scripted dialogues. That's always level 1 because it's still useful in a self-serve fashion. Customers can still find at least like the first line of support useful that way. What we do is we enrich that with a second layer. The second layer is for open-ended questions, right? So maybe you show up and then you see on the site again, on the website of an e-commerce brand, maybe they're selling shoes, and maybe you have a few questions regarding the return policy because you want to make sure that it accommodates you before you start shopping. The chatbot takes care of that. But then you have, with the dialogue, with the decision tree, you can click and you find, okay, return policy, I get my answer. But then maybe you have a more complex question saying, I'm looking for kids' shoes, size 3, and in leather, for example. So the question is open-ended and therefore much more structured and I guess even longer and complex. So we do additional, basically that's where the AI training comes into play, where the AI will recognize in real time the intent of the question, of the open-ended query. In this case, I'm looking, okay, so it's a product search for kids' shoes. Okay, shoes is the product item. Kids is a tag, it's kind of a filter, a search filter. So you see like the AI will kind of dissect the sentence and then it will automatically in microseconds, it's all happening in the backend, will fetch in the database that it's connected to. So in our case, we connect with the product database, the product feeds. So it will fetch an answer. And if there's a degree of confidence high enough, let's say 80%, well, then it will offer an automated response in microseconds to that question. If the degree of confidence is too low, well, then that's where our system is hybrid. Then it will automatically escalate the conversation. The good news, though, by escalating to a human agent, well, most systems will just kind of escalate it and that's it. In our case, we will still recognize the context of the conversation and the topic to ping in the back end the right product expert. So for example, the shoe specialist. So that's really like that's more what you would call the conversational AI experience on the higher end of the spectrum. If there is AI training, this is more of a smart chatbot. If there's no AI training, if it's all pre-scripted, well, it's a dumber experience, but it can still be useful for some limited use cases.
Yeah,
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I've actually used both. Typically, when I go to a website and I'm looking for some information that I can't find, first thing I'll do is I look it up if they have a chatbot. And for as you said, quite often it's just a basic, but it does the job. I mean, I'm looking for something, opening hours, or I'm looking for something that is missing, or I've got something that I don't understand, maybe how to do something. And the responses are, I would say, in most cases, very, very helpful and very accurate. I went to my bank, for example, used chatbot, and it's a much more evolved chatbot and does the job really, really well, where I rarely have to call and speak to a person. It actually does the job in most instances.
And if I may add, Mario, it's like at your grocery store, right? You can choose to do the self-checkout, go through self-checkout because you find it more convenient and faster. Or if you want a special assistance, or you feel like you're not gonna, you don't like the automated and self-service lane, well, you can go see a real person. So we always give the option as well. As an end customer, you choose your own adventure in a way. And I think that's where it's important to really kind of draw a distinction between fully automated and hybrid. Fully automated, for me, I've rarely seen any satisfying customer experience that way because it's not magical. It's been very hyped up in the media that AI is this magical thing, but reality is AI is very hard, and conversational AI, what we're talking about here, is especially hard because of the different ways that people ask the same question. The same customer intent, that's the way we call it, can be asked in a variety of ways, and some ways might be understood by the chatbot, others might be confusing. So linguistics is very hard, and especially if you start factoring in even cultural specificities, right? So depending, I'll take French for example. We both speak French, and you and I both know that French from France is definitely not the same ball game, the same French as French in Canada. So just that, is a level of complexity for an AI to really understand, because there's slang, sometimes even acronyms, different ways of even using emojis depending on cultures. All that stuff is really influencing an AI's capability. So again, always good to have a safety net, to have a real human presence when needed, but at least the AI, the first layer, gives satisfaction on both sides. Customers get a faster response, and customer service teams stop copy pasting the same answers to the same questions over and over again.
Yeah, I remember the first time I used a self checkout at a grocery store in the UK. I felt a little bit awkward. I was putting stuff in, scanning, put in my bag and etc. And I really felt like I was robbing the store when I left. I said, nobody's going to check what I put in my bag. But it's an interesting experience when you go through it for the first time and realize how the world is actually evolving and changing. I'd like to actually move on to now, obviously, to the travel industry. The organization I work for, represents this really big industry, which is really in big difficulties at the moment due to the current crisis. But I'd like to know, have you worked or are you working with travel brands currently?
Well, we're focused pretty much exclusively on retail. That said, we worked in the past. Well, we're still working with a few hotels, and we had some conversations with some airlines, actually, two airlines in Canada, and without revealing their names, they were pretty big, and obviously for these guys, it was really about efficiency, right? It was really, we talked about the first line of customer support for them. It wasn't even about selling more. It was just about managing all the day-to-day interactions with customers, like again, reimbursements, or like flights being canceled, flight status. So even by identifying the top 10, top 20 questions at the scale of an airline, it can be an interesting tool, because you can still automate the bulk of these recurring questions and save a lot of time for your team. And oftentimes, obviously we're traveling less these days, but when you travel as the end customer, as a person, you're always tight, right? Even if you leave early, somehow something happens and you're always at the last minute. So having kind of a personal butler, in a way, a personal concierge that gives you updates of flights, I think it can really enhance the customer experience. That said, we found, at least in our own experience, that the airline business was moving a bit slower on this, and the retail disruption was bigger. So hence it created more urgency and a bigger need for our industry. So that's why we started focusing on retail. But I definitely see a big opportunity, and once the world gets back to normal. But definitely, I think airlines could benefit from that, from a customer experience standpoint, because keep in mind, most airlines have usually a brutal net promoter score, except for a lucky few. So there's definitely room for improvement on the customer experience side.
Yeah, having worked for two airlines for a large number of years, I can definitely say that chatbot would be really helpful for the airlines in increasing their productivity, saving them cost of operational cost, and increase customer satisfaction too. Because very often people who will contact the call centers or go to the website will search for simple things. What is the excess baggage that you're allowed to bringing on board the aircraft, and for check-in, what are the hours for check-in? I mean, just simple things that can easily be answered by chatbot, or things like, is the flight on time? There are a multitude of other places where you can find this information. You can certainly search their website, but typically an airline's website has so much content that it's not always that easy to actually find. So I would certainly agree that chat chatbot would be an ideal solution for airlines, for hotels, for even OTAs and lots of other businesses, even tour operators.
And that's a good point, Mero, because obviously, again, when you're going to the airport, usually you don't have your desktop, you don't have your laptop with you. You're on your mobile, and beyond that, the modern day customer is basically living. The mobile phone is the most ubiquitous access to the internet and all that information. And the interface is much smaller. So when you're on a website, you're happier to chat, to trigger a conversation, because it becomes a more intuitive interface than actually scrolling and then looking for the FAQ section, or looking for that small tab on the site where the information is disclosed. You don't want to search, you want to be spoon-fed. Increasingly, that's the expectation of the modern day customer, because speed is of the essence, convenience is very important. And with chat, we found that it kind of checks all these boxes, especially you're on another side of the globe in Asia. Well, we're expanding, and we have a few clients, for example, in Indonesia. We're also expanding with a global brand in Japan and South Korea. And the Asian market in general, very, very mobile friendly, right? Very mobile first. In China, it's all inside WeChat. So the internet, almost messaging, the messaging app is almost the internet. It's the main interface. So increasingly, you're seeing the same phenomenon everywhere in the world, not just in Asia, in North America and Europe. And that's why brands are starting to invest there, because they see that the new entry points, the new storefronts, or the new channels to their business is really the messaging channels on their website. It's not the physical locations anymore. So it's a paradigm shift, and you need to adjust. But then with a multiplicity of channels, how do you manage this at scale? That's the big challenge for them, without having cost exploding and just having armies of customer service agents. Well, that's where the AI comes into play to just automate the first line. So it's a win-win on both sides.
Yeah, I've left North America a very, very long time ago, but I can tell you that here in Asia, I suspect that actually chatbot is probably already used by a lot of people, even though they might not be even conscious they are using one. But also because the super apps, the Line app, the WeChat, as you mentioned, or Grab, which is now becoming even used not only for transport, but for finance and lots of other services, is something that we all use on a daily basis. You can find inside these apps information about all sorts of things, not only about your ground transportations, but your travel and your finances and retail and lots of other things also. So it's becoming actually more natural for people to use messaging apps to not only communicate between themselves, but also to communicate with brands. I recently just actually this week bought a bicycle. And through line chat, I was chatting with the brand, with the stores, to better understand how to assemble the pieces and et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I can certainly actually understand what you're saying.
And this phenomenon is accelerated by where we're living right now, right? The lockdowns around the world are forcing people to shop from a distance, and therefore for businesses to sell from a distance. And chat is just the most nimble, I guess, the most convenient channel for these new sales conversations to happen. Why? Because they're not replacing any habits, they're just accelerating them. I'm sure we all, messaging for non-business conversation is basically the main interface. It's through Messenger, WhatsApp, Instagram. You mentioned Line. It's through these channels that we communicate with our friends, with our colleagues, with our family. So why not with businesses? And I think COVID-19 has made this new phenomenon really much more ubiquitous, because there's no other workaround for now. That's the way to shop when everything is closed.
Earlier this week or last week, I was talking to a group of students and in tourism, And we ended up talking about AI and chatbots in general. And they asked me a question which I've heard so many times before, not only from students, but also from people within the industry. They're actually saying, well, we talk about AI and chatbots and in the travel industry, but we're a service industry where human touch is actually really important. And how can you actually provide service in an industry which is famous, certainly here in Asia, for its human contact and human touch, and still use a chatbot or AI to make it more efficient? And how would you respond to comments like this from someone within the industry?
Well, I totally agree. I don't think, I don't think we should strive to eliminate the human touch. That would be that wouldn't be ideal. I think what we can strive though is we can aim to make the human touch more efficient and to focus it where it's needed. Because if you start interviewing customer service agents who are not augmented by AI, for example, well, you'll realize that their day to day is mostly, opening their whatever, it's a Google sheet or Google, doc, and they will just copy paste most of the answers. So they're like robots in a way, and it's not fulfilling for them, and it's not fulfilling for the end customer who's waiting for their availability to get a simple answer. So I think we should always see technology, and in this case AI, as an extension of human beings, right? I mean, even if you go back in time, the hammer is the extension of the human fist. You can say the computer is the extension of the human brain. It's not a replacement, and that's really our philosophy at the Heyday, where if you actually, our mission is to make e-commerce more personal, right? And that personalization would not be able to happen without at least a portion of a human touch. So I think the AI is really there to automate the robot work, the redundant stuff, the stuff that human beings are not only like not that good at, but also that we don't really enjoy, and to keep the human touch for the real meaningful interactions. For example, I'll give you like a specific example of or even more sensitive conversation. There was one example when we analyzed it was in the food industry, right? A yogurt brand. Actually, maybe they're present in Asia, Danone, big French conglomerate. Anyway, so we were analyzing the call center logs, and obviously you see all the repetitive questions, but at some point we saw an edge case, really an outlier question where someone had found a piece of wood in their yogurt. Maybe they were just at the park and something fell from a tree in the yogurt, and then they didn't see it and took their spoon, and then what's that? They overreact and there's a piece of wood. So that was an edge case that they seen at the call center. This is something that you don't want an AI to manage, because maybe they were about to feed their kids with that. It's a very sensitive and personal conversation, in a way, interaction with a customer. So I don't think, in this case, what we did is we created a rule where when it's sensitive like that, we automatically escalate to a human. We don't even try to automate, to give our best answer. And I don't think that should change. I think we really need to see it as an enhancement of human beings, not a replacement. And I really feel like when we look at even our own data in our analytics dashboard, you see basically the degree of satisfaction of customers when they were taken care of by a human agent, for example. And we've seen that number consistently go up since they have less conversations to manage. At the same time, they can dedicate more time and give a better higher level of care, in a way, to each and every customer, and therefore the satisfaction is going up. It's going up. So it's a win-win, because they're more fulfilled, as I mentioned earlier. On the brand side, the agents are happier with their jobs, and the customers are happier with the service. So that's really like the long answer. The short answer is, let's not replace human beings, and let's just look at how can we enhance them. That's really the spirit.
Good. Well, I think that's a very good answer, and hopefully will help travel brands better understand the value of actually working with organizations such as yours and develop chatbots. What's next for Heyday besides becoming unicorn and conquering the world?
Yeah, that's a big challenge, right? That's a big ambition. Well, for us, you talked about the fact that I come from Montreal, so we built a business in Montreal. So we start with our backyard, like every startup, you start with local clients, right? We had the big brands with brands that were mostly, their footprint was mostly in Canada. And then because of the fact that our AI was multilingual and out of the box, because of the specificity of the Montreal market, where it had to be bilingual, English and French out of the box. Well, it was easier for us to export and expand in Europe. So we started to land more and more clients in France, for example. That has been like so far. I mean, we're only like 3.5 years old, so most of our clients are from North America or Europe. But obviously, as we start signing more global clients, they have a presence in Asia, they have a presence in Latin America, they have a presence in Africa. So we need to start basically like expanding our AI capabilities to cater to these different markets, but also integrate with the local apps. You mentioned Line. No one uses Line in North America. Very popular, more popular in Asia. So this is really like from a product standpoint, we're really looking at how can we make our product more scalable. Then from a financing standpoint, because that's all fun. Product is all fun, but you need to find, need to fuel that growth and to hire people and to keep expanding. You need a little bit of financing. So right now, we just secured additional financing, but we're also working on probably for the back half of 2021. What we call this a round of financing, a Series A, essentially in the venture capital lingo. So a round is going to be between 10-15 million probably USD, and that's going to give us more ammunition to basically do what I just explained, right? Expand both from a product standpoint, but also from a market grab. Because make no mistake, we talked about the ubiquity of messaging apps and how chatbots are becoming more and more of a almost a commodity. They're becoming, people are getting used to them. This is good news for us. It means that the market is exploding and expanding. Well, for us, it's going to be basically a matter of speed and acceleration. We need to grab more and more market because we know once we're working with brands, we're pretty sticky. We stay. There's a partnership that usually lasts over time because we're deeply embedded. But the market grab, it's really a race right now. So we need to add fuel to the rocket ship, and that's going to be, I would say, in the 12 and 18 months horizon. That's really our obsession right now.
As we get to a close, Etienne, what's the next big development for AI? Can we expect to have each our own Jarvis in the near future?
Well, that's a huge question. I have no crystal ball, but I'll quote someone who's a better expert than I am, Dr. Luc Julia, French guy who I had the pleasure to interview in a conversation like this back in the day. But he's the co-founder of Siri, and now he works at I think the SVP Innovation and AI at Samsung. But as the co-founder of Siri, I bet you that he knows a thing or two about AI, right? And I asked him the question, similar question to you: how close are we to AGI, right? To kind of a general artificial intelligence that could answer everything and be uber smart? And he paused and he said, "Well, I don't think we'll ever get there." Well, AI that's the thing, right? We tend to kind of see it as a unicorn and it's magical and can answer everything, accomplish everything. AI is very good where there is patterns, when there are patterns, when there is redundancy. For the rest, everything that's more emotional or very kind of intuitive, human beings are much better. So I think you will see more and more advances in the next 5 years in terms of very targeted use cases of AI. We talked about an enjoyable experience you had recently in banking, or at Heyday we're focused on retail. When you're pinpointing a use case, you can get pretty effective. And when I say pretty effective, it's 80% effective, which is already great, right? But being 100% effective, or creating a personal butler that knows Mario Hardy, like, inside and out, and can, knows your life as if it's your best friend. We're not there yet, but there's definitely people working on that on more of a, I'd say, personal level. There are people who are working on personal butlers, but I think the super apps that you mentioned earlier, whether it's a WeChat or you mentioned Grab, or these are kind of becoming our own butlers, right? You can order food, you can book an appointment with a nurse. So the next step is really right now it's kind of these apps are reactive. You need to interact with them and input, your question, or input your need, like what you're looking for. With AI, I think the next iteration, it will be not to be reactive, but to be more adaptive, and even to anticipate our needs. So personalization, I think, is the next frontier. But a general artificial intelligence that knows it all and can do anything. Again, I'll take the Siri example from, quoting the inventor of it, and he said Siri can barely discuss for more than one or two steps of conversation. And that's like, we're talking about Apple. It's not a small company. It's not Heyday from Montreal. It's Apple, and they haven't cracked a general artificial intelligence agent that can chat about everything. It can answer most things, but you can have a conversation. So I think we need to put that in perspective when we're looking at about AI. We can't go overboard with our expectations. But you know what? Just automating the robot work, or like the repetitive work that's pretty boring. If our jobs can be a bit more interesting and more fulfilling, and we have more time to spend on the human touch, I think we'll all be winning. And for me, I'd be pretty happy that that's all AI can do. That would be good enough.
I think that's a very good way to close this segment. And Étienne, it's been wonderful to talk to you today. One last thing is, when this whole pandemic situation ends, where will you travel?
Oh, well, you know what? I owe my wife a trip to London. So she turned 30 while the pandemic started. It was in April, it was in May, and the pandemic started to unleash obviously in March and April. So we were fully locked down, and I had to obviously like cancel my plans, and I couldn't surprise her with that trip, but now I owe her. So that's definitely the first in line. And the second one, well, I'm a big fan of Europe, but we got the chance to get married in Positano in Italy on the Amalfi Coast. And if you've ever been there, you know how magical it is. So I have to say, when I look at the wedding pictures, I kind of miss it and want to go back. So maybe that's a close second. Maybe as part of the same trip. Who knows?
Yeah, excellent. Well, Étienne, it's been wonderful to talk to you today, and thank you for sharing your insights on chatbots and AI. And we wish Heyday a great success into the future. We'll certainly keep an eye on your business and yourself. Again, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Mario. It was a pleasure.